sharing, I did mention this when I gave the example of the Japanese investing in Japanese stock market and in the Indian market, and also another example of an American investing in Nasdaq and PhD Sensex. So there are then two arguments now. One, that capital is scarce here, the returns are higher, so therefore capital mobility. But that is one-way mobility. Capital moves from developed countries to emerging economies by that argument of two plus. By this other argument of risk sharing, there is a rationale for not just movement of capital from the US to India, but there is also a rationale for movement of capital from India to the US to share the risk. Now, the examples that are given in both cases were where the Japanese market crashed and the Indian market didn't, and in the other case where the US market crashed and the Indian market didn't. But one can now consider other examples in which the Indian market crashed, but the foreign markets did not. Take the case of 1992, 1994, early 90s, when an important step in liberalization took place, and that led to a big boom in the stock markets. The stock market went up considerably from something like 1,000 to 4,000 BSE Sensex in a short span of time, and then it crashed. So, if an Indian in the early 90s, consider two Indians, one who had invested only in BSE, and another who had invested in BSE and in, let us say, other emerging markets or in developed economies. Then the one who had part of the investment abroad wouldn't have got the low returns that the other Indian got who invested only in the BSE. So there is a rationale for this. Of course, if you consider both of these together, then there is a rationale for net inflow of capital into emerging economies. But that net doesn't mean that the movement is only one way. Part of the movement is from the emerging economy. And in that context, at least in the context of India and in the context of households, which I quickly mentioned earlier, the investments by households abroad is negligible. That is partly a problem of awareness, but it's also partly a problem of regulation. Though there has been some liberalization, in principle, the effective outlets for investments by Indians abroad are very limited. Though there have been some changes, so there are these operational parts, but there are also tax parts. To give you an example, if you invest in an Indian company, then the long-term capital gains tax is zero. The tax on dividends is zero. But if you were to invest in Dow Jones or the Nifty index, then the income becomes taxable. So that is another discouragement that is happening here. What it does is that it makes us vulnerable to the risk. So it would be safer. It would be safer if households were to be allowed and possibly even encouraged in the early stages to invest.
But there is a small problem there. Even if suppose Indian government says we will not tax, but the American government will still tax them, isn't it? If any foreigner makes a capital gain, they will have to pay tax, isn't it, in the US tax law? So changing policy at the Indian end may not make much of a difference here.
Well, if it is the case that the tax has to be paid and it is better than the Indian government gets a tax rather than the US government gets a tax, then sure. But suppose it is, I don't know the tax laws across countries, but countries like Australia tend to be pretty liberal with these things. Ireland, for example. So if the tax rates are zero or lower there, then it's not the case that a foreign government is getting the tax instead of the Indian government. So what it does is it puts the risk sharing at a disadvantage. There's a risk for the households.